Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this INSEAD AI session on AI history, understanding AI's past to navigate the future. I'm Fabio Valle, co-founder of the INSEAD AI Community, and today we will explore how AI has evolved and what history can tell us about what is coming next. I'm very pleased to be joined by Professor Theos, who will guide us through this insightful journey. Theos has been working on machine learning and AI for more than 30 years, so he has a lot to tell us. And he has been a great contributor to our INSEAD AI community. Thomas Kuiper and my co-founder, Robert Meichenko, are also here to help with moderated discussion. In the typical INSEAD tradition, Theos is today in France, Robert in Miami, Thomas in Taiwan, and I'm in New York City. We want to make this session very interactive, so please share your questions in the chat, and let's get started. Theos, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Fabio, and very happy to do this. This came out as an idea during this infamous INSEAD Alumni AI WhatsApp group for the club that Fabio and Robert has founded, I think already 3 years ago. It's crazy.
2 years and a half.
2 years and a half. Oh, wow, amazing. And there we have all sorts of crazy discussions, and more often than not, I go off tangent, and I apologize for this to everybody who has to suffer that. And one of those tangents was related to the history, and then I said, how about we do a webinar, and that's where this comes from a few months ago, and thanks a lot for putting this together. Let me start by saying that overnight, I had a very interesting email that hit me that may be related to our webinar. Why? Because it came from my PhD advisor, Tomaso Poggio. I always say in public that probably Tommy is the deepest and longest thinker in the space of AI and science alive today, if I may say, use that morbid word, unfortunately. And he sent me an email where he also had something about a table of contents of a new book he's working on, which it's incredible. And I'll read a little bit, a few lines from his preface. And then I WhatsApped him quickly and said, Tommy, that's what I'm doing today. If you have 10 minutes, join. So we may have a pleasant surprise. And if so, we'll do fun. Now, before going further, 2 things. As we all know, there is no one history. And of course, usually there is no one history because of people having different agendas in politics. In the case of science, there is no one history because there are different communities of people. And we'll talk about the sociology of science a lot. And even if you want to be totally honest and totally apolitical, even if you are from the same community, you still get different elements of the science simply because none of us have seen everything. So by definition, for example, even if Tommy was to do this webinar, of course it will be different. Now, by the way, the webinar is based a lot on an article I wrote on LinkedIn that I shared also with the slides, which are on my LinkedIn also. My last LinkedIn post has the slides that I'm going to use. And that article was actually received feedback from Tommy. I sent it back to him a few times to make sure I have things right. But all I want to say is that if you ask somebody like Michael Jordan, who is another of the big names, whose students include people like Andrew Wang and Eric Zink, Mike probably would give you a totally different story, right? So be aware of this, obviously. I don't need to apologize about this in a sense, because that's the nature of the beast. That's the first point. And apologies if I do any mistakes and if I miss things. Of course, there's no way otherwise. Second thing is that I will use some slides that all of them were generated by AI. Almost all of them. There are a couple who are not. And third thing is that, as the title is, and we were talking about this with Fabio, it's a history, and we can improvise, we can have fun. But effectively, it's not just history. It's history with the aim also to identify the underlying forces that determine the present and potentially the future. And in fact, sometimes we will be talking about the future without knowing, of course, what the future is, by saying things like, of course, there is a lot of laws of nature that we know exist, and here is a law of nature from the past. A law of nature from the past is that science moves with paradigm shifts due to sociology and other reasons. And by the way, we know that there are 4 different types or whatever, 5 different types of fields: science, mathematics, engineering, social sciences, whatever, computer science, right, engineering. So there is nothing else we know, in a sense. some things are constant, and we will leverage those constant things to see how they may link to where we are heading towards. And that's how we will be going between past and future. And part of the idea of going to the future, I think, and that's how I think about it, is that this relates also to making business decisions, making investment decisions, understanding where the world is moving towards today, and separating hype from noise and hype from fundamentals, let's say. Also, as a bonus, we have some quote-unquote predictions using an AI process that I'll explain briefly from BCG, McKinsey, and the financial analysts. Lesson number one is, if you want to understand where something is going towards, ask the insiders. Everybody else is an outsider and at best looks at things from the rear mirror. Another way to say it is that the only way to predict the future is to shape it. At the end, we'll go through an exercise, which is, what are your predictions? How should we predict? And there's a bunch of questions. Now, in the process, we agreed with Fabio that I will spend about half an hour to 40, maybe 45 minutes with questions from Fabio and also from you. And Fabio will be asking some questions to clarify things. Of course, Fabio knows everything I'm going to talk about, but he will pretend that he's one of the people who hasn't heard any of this stuff and ask questions to clarify for you. You can also ask questions and then we can have a discussion. Okay?
So you use the chat box, the chat here to ask all your questions.
Okay. With all those disclaimers, let me share my screen. And I hope you can see my, what's this? Yeah. And as I said, lots of things are based on this article, which is pinned on my LinkedIn, which is written 2 years ago, again, because of the WhatsApp group. Again, thanks, Fabio and Robert, and everybody else, of course. And there is, frankly, in this article, there are enough links for you to spend the lifetime. It's a maze. It's literally a maze. It's a lot of links and lots of footnotes. I encourage you to go and check it out. Again, as I said, it's pinned on my LinkedIn and a bunch of other articles. So let me start. And also, all the slides are generated by Notebook LM as an infographic based on these 9 articles. The last number 9 being a political one, a geopolitical one, just came out 2 days ago, and I thought it's very interesting to use. And number 10 is a website related to a project that I'm doing these days with a number of people, including I see Alex here, and also Tommy and Bernard Solkov and people like Jan Lekana are involved, and Tommy and Demis is also endorsing, as you see on our website. If you go to our website, which is 2 hours old and evolving, you can see a bunch of stuff there about eurx.ai. As I said, this is the article. Now, let me share my screen and go through. Basically, I will go through slide by slide, infographic by infographic, generated by these articles. Okay? And I'll try to use the infographic that AI gave to talk about this and make a story. So let me share now here these infographics. So this is a very important picture. I got into this picture by becoming familiar with a book of a physicist, an Italian physicist, which now his name escapes. I should have had his book here. Carlo Rovesci, I think his name, Roveri, what's his name? Who wrote a book called Anaximander. Sorry, now I'm blank out on this. Anaximander is his book. I should have checked before. And where basically the thesis of his book in a nutshell is that there are lots of ancient Greek philosophers that we all know about, Aristotle, Plato, you name it. But we don't really know much about this guy called Anaximander. And his argument is that this guy is probably the most important of all, because before Alexander and even Plato and the likes, he was with Thales, the Thales mathematical theorem, 600 BC roughly. And what the argument is, he was one of the people, not the only one, of course. Thales, I suspect, was more or less on the same page, or at least at school, Thales, who basically made the following important statement that changed human history. It changed human history maybe 2,000 years later, more or less. This happened back then. And the observation is the move from mysticism, things like, why are there waves in the sea, is because Poseidon is pissed or something, or because why is this war happening, because whatever, that other god is annoyed by somebody. That's mysticism. From mysticism to empiricism, meaning why are there waves in the sea? Because every physical phenomenon has a physical cause. And that's huge. That's probably huge. And when I teach executives, often I ask them, how much of your decisions are based on gut feeling, which I call mysticism to some extent, versus evidence-based, data-driven? Basically, I ask them, Are your organizations pre-Anaximander or post-Anaximander? And remember, Anaximander is 2,600 years ago. And of course, almost 80%, and of course decreasing, are saying we're pre-Anaximander. And I'm sure the case also among you. And this has to do with AI. It has to do with AI big time. In two ways. First of all, because data, empiricism, data. AI is about data. And in fact, AI is data. In fact, there is nothing but data. The AI model, the weights are data. The input to AI is data. The output to AI is data. Everything is data. There is nothing else but data. I may dare to say that if something does not use or emit data, like our brain, it does not exist in the universe. We cannot see it, right? Your brain is data, right? If you want to go there, we can measure it, right? If you had like electrodes or whatever. So this is fundamental, right? Data and AI are the same. It's not data, it's an input to the AI. They are the same. In fact, I urge you to think, what does it mean to have raw data? Because raw data is what comes from measurements, but everything else is processed by something, therefore by some equation. That equation can be a deep learning, or it can be a linear regression, can be a credit score, who cares? But I would like this dichotomy between data and AI and intelligence to be broken. That's part of the reason why Anaximander is the first AI person in history, arguably, at least as far as I know.
Let me interrupt 1 second here because we have also Tomaso Poggio.
Oh, amazing. Tommy, stop sharing immediately. I'm stopping sharing immediately. Fantastic. Tommy, I don't know how long are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Amazing, Tommy. Thanks for joining. I was just telling, I don't know when you joined, but I was telling everybody that I received your book table of content overnight, and I was looking at this, and as I told you in the email, this is such a beautiful book. I can't wait. If you don't mind, I will, since you are here, I will first read the preface of your book, even though it's a draft, but I don't have to. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts. First of all, I don't know how long you will stay, but your thoughts about where we are today in AI, what we need to do here as business, but also citizens, but also researchers, and where is the US, Europe, China, and where are the big scientific questions today related to AI? I know it's a lot of questions.
Just
a lot of questions.
Just for the public, can you do? I know Tomaso very well, but maybe...
Tomaso Poggio, Tommy Poggio, you will see him everywhere in my articles and what I send you on my LinkedIn. Happens to be my PhD advisor in MIT. He was a postdoc advisor of Demis Hassabis. He was a postdoc advisor of Amnon Shashua, who built, I don't know, 5 unicorns and Mobileye. He was a PhD advisor and postdoc advisor of, I don't know, 50, 100 people, maybe more. Tommy, good question. AI lab since 1981. I always love to say, Tommy, that in your autobiography, one sees things like, I used to enjoy talking with Richard Feynman about intelligence while you guys were also in Thinking Machines of Danny Hillis back in the 90s, 80s, together, 80s, I don't know when. And you always enjoy going to vacation with Francis Crick, talking about neuroscience and intelligence, or biology and intelligence. With Tommy, actually, I don't know if you remember, in La Jolla, we went together to Francis' office. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
He was there, but we went there. So I said before you came, and that I always say, and of course I'm biased a little bit, that you are the deepest thinker, in my opinion, in the space of AI and science in the world. And I really mean it, Tommy. Thank you for coming. First of all, Tommy, I made a statement before you came, and I'll go to questions. The statement was, data and AI and everything that exists in the universe is data. Because the AI has the weights, data, the input data, the output data, the training, the testing, everything data. So everything is data, including the measurements of our neurons and the activations and all the chemical reactions. So by definition, we don't measure it, but if we could, everything is data, otherwise you don't observe it. That's a bit of and therefore I want to link data and AI in a different way. That's what I was saying. Second, going to neuroscience and AI, and also where we are today and where we go, I don't know what your sense is, and also the eurx. I mentioned also eurx that we do together. So I'll leave the floor for you for a few minutes just to share, and also for your book. I can read the preface if you like, but let me pause here and pass the floor to you to share whatever comes to your mind.
Okay. First of all, I think you probably said that, but the problem of intelligence, I think, is not only one of the great problems in science, but I personally think the greatest one. And one of the reasons is, of course, that if we make any progress in understanding and replicating intelligence, then we can more easily solve all other great problems in science, such as the origin of the universe, or the structure of space-time, or the origin of the structure of the evolution of evolution itself, and so on. Now, I'm not completely sure that AI today is telling us very much about the brain. One has to be cautious because we have a tendency of using the technology of the time to explain the brain. At the time of Descartes, 3 centuries ago, his model of the brain was an hydrodynamic system of fluids pumped in and out of different parts of the body. Today, of course, we have transformers, and people tend to try to see where transformers are in the brain. And that may be mistaken. But at the same time, I believe, and there are some evidence that there are fundamental principles of intelligence that are common probably across all the different types of intelligence, different architectures of today, and also the human brain and more primitive brains. So I think we're making a lot of progress in understanding intelligence in general, and specifically also in understanding, with the help of neuroscience, the human brain. It's just a caution that the second problem, understanding human intelligence, may be still quite a bit farther away than in developing intelligent machines, like it has happened in the last 10 years or so. Because I believe that chatbot LLMs like Gemini and ChatGPT are actually intelligent. They pass a Turing test. In terms of implications for business, I think there are a few. Of course, the technology at the moment may not solve completely the problem of intelligence. These systems are not intelligent in the same way that we are, but obviously they are very useful. And so there is a golden age of which has already started, of devising applications of them and specific versions for different application, different business application. At the same time, we have to realize that the architecture, for instance, of transformers is almost certainly not the optimal or best or final one. And there is much more fundamental work that needs to be done. It's not only in terms of devising models that can learn not only language, but also word models in the sense of physics, in the sense of learning how to interact with other agents, other people. And this is a new frontier that requires some more fundamental research. So it's probable that we'll see some startups starting to do more fundamental research. There have been some signs of it with recent statement by Ila Sutskever and possibly Jan LeCun, and so that's one thing that will probably happen quite soon. Startups based on kind of fundamental research. And beyond that, in terms of what I think will be needed, is that to develop artificial intelligence that have an organization more similar to our brain, if we want a system that are like us and maybe better than us. But again, I think this will take not a few years, but possibly a couple or more decades.
Tommy, 2 questions before you go. And I'm sure you're busy. So I understand, and that's what with Fabio, who is organizing this together. one question we discussed beforehand was, do we expect a new disruptive innovations in the sense of replacement of transformers, much like the attention is all you need paper of 2017 created LLMs, and therefore the next one may disrupt OpenAI or something, or the likes, A, and B, how do we move from LLMs and chatbots to the physical AI and sciences, and how can AI actually push science? And therefore, what new opportunities we may see going forwards, which are potentially an order of 2 of magnitude bigger than anything we've seen so far.
The last one, if I may, on history, what has surprised you most of LLM wave?
Yeah, let me start with the last one. I think that I was not so surprised by previous developments, but I think LLMs, ChatGPT was really a surprise. How much you can get from language generation, from learning from language. It's not that you can do it, but how well that has been working. That was difficult to predict. I was really surprised. Now, in terms of the question of Theos, I would be also surprised if Transformer will remain for the next 10 years as the best architecture. Now, it's difficult to say whether new architectures will come through incremental changes of the transformer design or there will be a breakthrough as there was in 2017. But I'll be surprised if the present architecture will remain the dominant one for the next 10 years. And the question in terms of how to learn word models, agent models, I think one way that is people are already beginning to do is to use simulations. For instance, just to give an example, I think the day before yesterday, Mobileye in Jerusalem acquired Mente, a startup by Lior Wolf, who happened to be a postdoc of mine. It's a robotic startup, and their signature mission has been to develop robots that can learn very quickly, imitating humans. And the basic way they do this is by using physics simulations, including tools made by NVIDIA that make very realistic simulation of the physical world of the robot and how it can move in reality. But so these are very good simulations, and you can train and simulate and train even online the robot with the simulation of the real world. And they managed to have pretty good demonstrations of doing unconstrained tasks in a home. Mobileye acquired it for, I think, 900 million.
Tommy, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time. Again, as I mentioned, with Tommy, with Alex, with a bunch of other people, we are starting eurx.ai, eurx.ai. And because we believe strongly that basically the disruptions, whether it comes from the next generation of transformers or from physical AI or from world models or from robotics or from science, will create enormous opportunities, potentially a lot bigger than anything we've seen the past 30 years or more. Who knows? And that's why we are supporting researchers to build startups. And that's a big mission and a big project and exciting times ahead. Tommy, thanks so much.
Thank you, Theos.
Thank you. And I'll read the preface of your book for the audience, if that's okay.
And you are welcome to come back when the book is ready.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Have a good day, Tommy. Let me share here my screen again.
While you do this, Tommy really wrote a lot about intelligence and probably has really shaped the scientific research in this field. So it was totally unplanned, but it was a great contribution, fantastic contribution.
Look, think about I think if you do some research, you will realize what you just got. Now, this is the preface of the book that he sent me overnight. He has like a table of contents here, right? A bunch of stuff, which is an amazing table of contents. But let me just read this. You can read it also. Basically, a little bit what he said. What we call deep learning is not merely a triumph of computer science or engineering. It is a natural phenomenon that demands explanation in terms of underlying principles, much as physics explains why the sun produces energy or why matter flows specific laws. This collection of essays is an attempt, it's all his papers, to uncover some of those principles. It argues that today's AI systems succeed because they instantiate deep structural regularities of the world. It captures, learns from the data, which are basically measurements from the nature, human or physical nature. They uncover structural regularities of the world because also the way they are built internally, fitting the representation of the world with the physics of the world with the representation of the model, the ways maybe our brain has learned to do through evolution. Regularity is that any intelligent system, biological or artificial, must exploit. Evolution again for us. That's the architecture side. Two principles emerge, etc., etc. Together, these principles offer a first step forward, a unified theory of modern AI, one that explains not only how current systems work, but why they work at all. The table of contents are incredible, but we don't have time for this. I'm going to go back to this. And I think Tommy already got us in the future. The future is expect new models that allow us to do new things, expect physical AI models, AI in the real world, where potentially they learn from simulations of the real world or from recordings of data from real world, along the lines of the mentee robotics that Tommy mentioned. A few weeks ago, I was reading about a Chinese factory that basically have the humans wearing glasses and basically recording everything they see as they do stuff on the assembly line or whatever they do. And that becomes training data for robots, basically. And this is a move of AI from the digital world to the physical world in some sense. I'll come to this later. But let me go back to where we left it. So Anaximander was the first person in AI because of the data aspect, and because also once you start analyzing data, you are doing science. At the end of the day, science, and I'll come back to this again, and that's why, by the way, Tommy has been talking about the need to develop a science of intelligence. Maybe in the near future, our children, or the children of our children maybe, will be getting bachelor degrees in the science of intelligence, which doesn't exist today. Remember, chemical engineering and electrical engineering, economics did not exist forever, right? They were the result of intellectual developments. So now we may have a Bachelor of Science in the science of intelligence. And at the end of the day, the science is about measuring stuff from the nature, testing hypotheses, developing theories, and doing this circle. Theory, hypothesis, measurement, empirical physics and theoretical physics kind of thing. And now, Anaximander was, in a sense, the first scientist in that sense. And I'll come back to this later about the AI and science, which potentially is one of the biggest things I will end with. But before we get there, from Anaximander, 2,600 years ago, and then, of course, it was lost in dark ages, and then you had a bunch of Copernicus, whatever it is, a bunch of Italians, I guess, in the 16th century, whatever it was, 15th century, etc., etc. And then we had the Renaissance, and then we had the 1800s, where the scientific revolution started. And that's where experimentation and science, of course, became powerful. And we had the scientific revolution that I'll come back at the end of the talk to position where we are now relative to that. But unless we see also 2,600 years ago, we do not see where we are today and where we're heading. And that's critical. And by the way, as I said, Anaximander is relevant for business today, because you have to remember, are you a mystic or are you an empiricist in your business decisions and investment decisions? That's a key decision, a key question that I always ask to executives. Now, I'll come later to artificial neuroscience and AI for science and the science of intelligence, but that's the first infographic. Now, let me go back to, quote unquote, the facts of the history. Not the previous slide was a bit of the framing of the history of AI, the history of science, the history of philosophy. And now we're going back to the usual factual paint of AI. So let me start by saying that the name AI I hate, and so do many others. Artificial intelligence, Trump was funny a few weeks ago, was saying, what do we call it AI, artificial intelligence? We should call it alien intelligence, which is how I like calling it. And somebody in the audience said, how about American intelligence? And he said, no, not American intelligence, it's intelligence for everybody. So that was a discussion in the Trump kind of Christmas, one of the Trump's Christmas kind of things. It's in one of the podcasts of All In, you can listen to it. But I dislike personally also the term artificial intelligence, and I agree with Trump on that, on this one specifically. And from what I understand, the name artificial intelligence came out from a bunch of people who got together at Dartmouth, because basically one of the problems they were solving is how can we raise more funding for research. And for that, we cannot call what we do cybernetics, we cannot call it signal processing, we cannot call it something else. Let's call it artificial intelligence, which raises money. And of course, 60 years later, whatever it is, Sam Altman made good out of this. Best marketing thing. We're going to build artificial general intelligence, give us billions. I would like to start saying that the name was born in 1956, but as I'll come to be a bit later, there is no one field, there is not one community. And now I'm going to go a bit to the sociology of science. The Dartmouth workshop in 1956, where the name was born by Marvin Minsky, McCarthy, whatever, a bunch of people there, was done by mostly computer scientists, right? Or early computer science. Some economists were, some people were of course, wear dual hats. And for the longest time, AI was dominated by computer scientists. Now, computer scientists are neither the top mathematicians of the world, although that was close. They are engineers, and they are definitely not scientists, at least not back then. I'll come to it today later, that AI is becoming a science later. So they had all sorts of algorithms, search algorithms, rule-based systems, whatever. Like Deep Blue type of algorithm. Deep Blue, that won Kasparov in 1997, was based on computer science type of AI. And that is the AI that is symbolic AI, broadly defined. Search is included there, although search relates also to machine learning AI, but let's keep it on the side for now. Rule-based, simple rules, expert systems. If this, then that. Or search for the next best move in a chess. Out of 1,000 moves, explicitly, one by one, with some probability and search algorithm, whatever. That was Deep Blue. Meanwhile, there were other communities. For example, there were mathematicians. There were cousins of AI that started actually even before the term AI was suggested. For example, one of the AI systems that have been in use for more than 100 years is the airplane autopilot. Of course, that's an AI. Why do we call AI the autonomous car and not the autonomous airplane? That makes no sense. Autopilot has been around, I think, since 1905 or something, the first one. And it was not called AI, it was called control theory. Control theory, which is a big field and very mature field and relates to the defense and the World War II kind of stuff, was about autopilots and about, if you think about this, how to develop systems. How does the autopilot roughly work? You get signals from outside, speed, whatever, angle, wind, temperature, you name it, and adjust continuously using a feedback loop in order to control the whole thing. That's data, measurement, data, adjustment based on some equations and whatever, calculations. That was called control theory. Another cousin of AI is statistics, which has been around since Gauss or something. And econometrics, which, by the way, the modern econometrics was developed by economists. Early 20th century mostly, because the economists back then wanted to develop economic kind of predictions, so they needed some statistical equations, regression stuff, or whatever. Regression was before that, of course. That's econometrics. And so that's another cousin. Another cousin is what's called signal processing, which has to do, another one is information theory. It has to do with compression. Information theory has to do with compression. For example, when you go from a vinyl music disc to a CD, you process the signal, you sample it, and you go from analog to digital. That happens through what's called signal processing, for those of you who are engineers in general. Signal processing is the reverse of machine learning. In signal processing, I have a complete function, mathematical function, the signal, the analog signal, and I'm trying to find what is the minimum number of data point samples to get so that I reconstruct that signal without having many differences. Go from a vinyl analog to a CD, digital. Machine learning is the reverse. How do I go from a few samples of the song to the song? So signal processing and machine learning are the reverse of each other. Compression, not signal, also compression. Compression is very much related also. Now, signal processing and compression, especially signal processing and control theory, actually, relate a lot with World War II and defense and DARPA and the Cold War in many ways. Now, these were different communities. So the control theory community was different. The signal processing community was different, although the two knew each other a bit, from what I understand. The information theory was different. The computer scientists, people who were doing AI, were different. And they were different sociology, back to Thomas Kuhn, the structure of scientific revolutions. Different sociology, different group of people. And those guys dominated what was called AI, using symbolic AI, because that's what they knew how to do. Although they did also some statistical ones. For example, the first deep learning in quote, which is the perceptron, no deep, it's only one layer and one neuron, was developed by Marvin Minsky, who was also in the 1958, 57, 56, sorry. It says 56, I thought it was 57 anyway, maybe hallucination of AI here. Workshop. Okay? But by and large, when I was taking, for example, the core undergraduate AI course in MIT in 1993 or something, 80% of the course for MIT undergraduate in AI in 1993, 80% was on symbolic AI, 20% was on neural networks and statistical AI, 1993. Machine learning, people like Tommy, for example, Tommy was always saying since the 70s, learning is at the core of intelligence. And therefore, machine learning has to be at the core of AI. Instead of having symbolic AI where we write down the rules or we do some kind of search, we should actually, instead of coding, which is the computer science approach, instead of coding intelligence, that's what computer scientists do, right? Intelligence should be learned. The code has to be written by the computer. This is basically, of course, Tommy was right, but it took decades for computer science to go from us coding the algorithm, the deep blue, and the expert system and the rules, to the AI, the machine learning the rules and the model. From us coding the rules of behavior to a learning algorithm learning the rules of behavior from the data. And that's the machine learning tradition, which had different people. And sometime in the mid-90s, and I'm jumping a lot of stuff here, we had a big flood of Soviet mathematicians in the US. I remember we had suddenly in MIT, I was there, so many Soviet people coming in mathematics department there, right? Remember that was just post the Berlin Wall thing. That relates. History, all histories are related, of course. And what was amazing, and why I'm saying this, because one of the guys who came was somebody called Vladimir Vapnik, who is a giant. He's Lex Friedman interview number 3 and number 100, number 150, I don't know. Watch his interviews in Lex Friedman. Very thick Russian accent, a genius. And Vladimir Vapnik, who was working in the Soviet Union before, of course, was involved in what's called ill-posed problems or inverse problems and regularization, which were mathematicians in Soviet Union. And those guys were solving problems that happens to be very much different names of, or at the core at least, of principles used in machine learning. So when Vladimir came to the United States, and I was lucky to interact with him when he came, because of Tommy, he was in Bell Labs, we were going there sometimes, he brought with him and he wrote a pivotal book, or a number of pivotal books. One of them was called, and you can find online, Statistical Learning Theory. The name says it all. Statistical Learning Theory is a book he wrote in 1995. And maybe I'll put it here. You share my screen. So this is the fundamental, this is a field, but I go for the book. I don't know what the book is. Let me see. Vapnik. Yeah, he has a bunch of books. Natural Statistical Learning Theory, Statistical Learning Theory, whatever. He has a bunch of them. This is the one I have in my office. It's a Bible. It's the Bible. And this book, which is 1995, basically changed history in a nutshell. Of course, history was ready to change. History doesn't change in one thing. Lots of people involved. Tommy, of course, was there, and Tommy, you are still there, so please correct me. But basically, that was the time where the machine learning people won. And everything was machine learning after that. And then you have the early 2000s, where you have the big tech coming in, and big tech had data. And therefore, we have recommender algorithms. Marketing was like a big driver. Advertisement targeting was a big driver. Lots of money poured, and lots of innovations came because of that. Lots of the best talent in machine learning was hired by Google and Amazon and Netflix later and Facebook later. And they pushed the limits of recommender systems and shallow learning for marketing mostly and advertisement, because that's where the money was, ad tech. Sorry.
Theos, just to summarize the symbolic AI and the machine learning. The symbolic AI was trying to define all the rules of the world so that the machine could perform them. And there was a big win by Deep Blue, but it didn't win. The paradigm didn't win at the end, because the machine learning, that is the other paradigm, that to have automatic systems, let's say, to learn from data.
Exactly.
And LLMs are coming from this.
Yes.
From this mother. Allow me to say.
Yes, absolutely, exactly that. Okay. In symbolic AI, let's put it this way: the intelligence is in the human who writes the code or the algorithm. In machine learning, the intelligence is in the algorithm who analyzes the data. Human chooses the data and the algorithm, and writes the machine learning algorithm, not the algorithm, the output of the algorithm. So the AI, if you like, which is basically the same as machine learning in this case, writes the rules, writes the final algorithm that we deploy, writes the ChatGPT weights.
Yes.
Humans don't write 1 trillion parameters of GPT-4. AI writes, the machine learning algorithm writes that. It's like a huge regression, if you like, right?
Yes.
Now, going exactly that. So that was decisive. And again, Tommy was talking about this in the 70s. And of course, he was right. And you see now also whom we had here. Or maybe still have some, I don't know. Now, early 2012s, actually, exactly, early 2010s, let's say, we had another. Now, one thing here sociology of science and research. Computer scientists started in the late 50s until, and we're talking about computer science stuff until the mid 90s, more or less. While we had these other cousins, signal processing, information theory, control theory being on the background, and statisticians and mathematicians. Mid 90s, let's say, computer scientists start getting displaced in the space of AI by mathematicians, statisticians, and statistical learning theory people. Sometime in the early 2000s, we had this. Actually, I remember exactly in year 2000. I remember I was in Hong Kong in a workshop with Tommy and with Steve Smale. Steve Smale is one of the biggest mathematicians of the 20th century. Steve Smale is known for whatever Steve Smale works on, other mathematicians follow. If you want to check Steve Smale, it's again Steve Smale for those of you who want to know.
Let's give the references at the end.
Yeah.
Because
So
we have a
Smale
limited.
basically he wrote a paper on the mathematical foundations of learning or something like this. That I was very happy to see that it was also roughly part of it was based on the work we were doing with Tommy. And after he wrote that, you had Terence Tao, who's another physics mentalist, and he talks a lot about AI and math nowadays, who followed. And basically, we had a decade of mathematicians, more or less, between 2000 and 2010 or something. So you went from computer scientists to mathematicians. And then Vladimir was also mathematician, right? And then 2012, we had the beginning of the era of the engineers. Jeff Hinton, Jan LeCun, Joshua Bengio, Ilya Sutskever, etc., etc. And all this started by AlexNet. It doesn't matter what it is, but basically a bunch of people figured out by chance. One can say they stumbled on it potentially, but nobody stumbles really. Everything has to be prepared, of course. In Toronto, I believe, and in Stanford, I don't remember where else. They stumbled on the following observation. If you take a lot of data and you put it in something which is a very complicated learning algorithm, which is basically a complicated equation to estimate, if you go back to regression, right? But that's not regression. This is like deep learning, multiple different equations, different architecture. And you train that and you estimate the parameters based on this huge amount of data with a lot of compute, then we get something amazing. We get performance of computer vision accuracy or of language which we've never seen before. And that was the beginning of engineering, the engineering era of AI, early 2010s. Okay? And now, and that's where we are now, transitioning to the science era, potentially. I'll come to this at the end, back to science. Again, remember, we had the computer scientists, we had the mathematicians. The computer scientists were not scientists, right? We had the they were kind of engineers in some sense also, mathematicians, engineers, whatever you want to call them. You had the mathematicians, you had the engineering era, and what's left? There's only one thing left, science. The only group that didn't come in the picture forcefully is science. And that's the next one. So I'll come back to this again. And it relates to AI and science and AI, the science of intelligence, and AI for science. This is huge. This is bigger than big. We've seen nothing yet. Zero. That's
So in summary, what is that let's say the ChatGPT and the Gemini of the world today give us a limited, let's say, a limited impact of what is going to come in the next years, and the science revolution is with powered by the AI is going to happen. It's going to change. It's going to be an additional wave in an Anaximandros world.
Yeah. Yes, and here I'm going to share me while I'm talking. It's science and industry, right? I was looking for this earlier, actually, and so I'm going to give it to you. This is from a Chicago Century of Progress. I had a call earlier about this. Science finds, that was 1933, I think. Science finds, industry applies, man, back then it was man, right? Adapts. Now we are at the very beginning of this. So far, we've seen nothing. Imagine, right, what's coming ahead of us. This is all ahead of us. We are still in kindergarten, one can say, if I may be a bit dramatic here, right? And science is a different animal. It's not engineering, it's not math. And it can create this kind of stuff. So we're at the beginning, we're at the S of this sentence, basically. And again, remember, this century of progress is like in 1933 in Chicago, right? 30, whatever it was. Okay, good. And here is a slide on Thomas Kuhn. I'm not going to go through this slide. You have it you have the slides. But I think
Can you go on slideshow mode so it's bigger?
Oh, sorry. So basically, why I bring Thomas Kuhn suddenly here, or these other sociology aspects of innovation, if you like, including Clayton Christensen, for those of you from business schools, the innovator's dilemma, which is about the innovator and the disruptor, right? The Kodak and the digital cameras kind of thing, right? Or the Intel and NVIDIA in some sense, although that's a bit different, right? It's basically because the innovator, disruptor is probably they're solving a different market, usually the low-end market, and then go to the high-end market. Different thing, different people, different talent, different skills, different market, different everything. Similar thing happens in science, of course, and it's about new communities coming in, the barbarians coming in quotes, and changing everything. And that's why it's important to understand the social dynamics of science. By the way, I have a podcast, Age of Intelligence. And the first episode of the podcast, I highly recommend you to listen. It's from somebody who used to be the head of the UK Homeland Security, who now has a consulting firm on tracking talent. That podcast says about how we can predict what's happening in AI and in the industry today by tracking where the different types of talent go, which companies and which countries. This is podcast episode number 1, Age of Intelligence. Now, I skipped a couple of things here. Super creativity, I'll skip because we don't have time, because we had Tommy, but this is, I think, the bottom line here is this one. Creativity is simple. Consciousness, intelligence, those are hard. Creativity is simple, and this is based on an article written in 2019 or so, which again is available on the slides. You can click on this on my website, also my LinkedIn pin. And it's one of my favorite articles where in 2019, before Gen AI, we discussed about how one can create creativity, can engineer creative machines. I'll skip this also, but you see here there are things around human AI collaboration, multimodality, continuous learning, right? And the mirror society. These are things in the article from 2019, which, by the way, if I pause here, these 3 themes are 3 of the core themes discussed today. If you look at the discussions today, lots of them discussions are about multimodality, Gemini. Lots of the discussions are about human AI collaboration, of course, and lots of the discussions are about continuous learning and continuous learning of the machines. So these 3 things are core today, and we link them to creativity in the article from 2019. Let me go back to a few things and go towards the future. This is MIT has an initiative, an institute-wide initiative called the Quest for Intelligence. And if I get the facts right, this kind of got initiated roughly from Tommy's center. Tommy had a center for brains, minds, and machines, which was between MIT, Harvard, and Brown, if I remember correctly. I don't know if Tommy's there. And then out of this, and lots of influence from Tommy in the computer science department of MIT, and generally, the quest for intelligence across the Institute of MIT has started. And this is from a workshop. But the slide, you have the slides also available. A workshop where basically it's an amazing workshop 2 years ago, the 10-year anniversary of CBMM. And there it was the agenda for research going forward, and 3 of the key elements was the following. Element number 1 is, and for some reason I have some blue lines here. I don't know what are these blue lines. Maybe yours can see them.
I think you need to undo the sharing slideshow. Okay.
Undo the sharing and start the sharing again.
We have also Ludo on with us.
Ludo is another amazing story. The best people on the planet, my 2 favorite people on the planet have been here. Thank you, Ludo. Ludo is about technology and governance. Governance, science moves the needle. Governance moves the needle in the right direction. Did I say it right, Ludo? I don't know, you are there?
Yeah, Sorry.
Now, let me go back to this. So 3 of the key elements of that workshop, and it was part of the workshop, was also to discuss what's next. 3 elements. Comparative study, compare intelligence of humans and AI. This is a little bit what with Ethan Mollick nowadays and the likes, right? For example, right? from working, but also psychologists can work here, social scientists can work here. The other is the internal analysis, what's happening inside. And this relates to the next slide, which has to do with what is called artificial neuroscience or mechanistic interpretability, which relates to safety, relates to controlling the behavior of AI by editing the brain of AI, the numbers inside the equation. Can we edit specific numbers in the equation of Gemini so that Gemini will never, ever again produce images that look like Van Gogh image paintings? What does it mean to have Van Gogh paintings? How can we describe it? We cannot, but maybe there are some parameters inside the Gemini equation that they fire or some activate some weights that are used more when it generates Van Gogh style paintings. If we edit those parameters, then Gemini will never generate these images. How about if we want to have an AI that will never talk about the concept of democracy, as if this concept was never invented, pre-ancient Greece? Think about it. What does it mean to never talk about the concept of democracy? It's not very easy to answer this, but imagine we were before the ancient Greeks. Can we make an AI that behaves as if we were before the ancient Greeks? And now think about the following. If we can do this, or variations of this, what then does it mean to be a human in the age of AI, where AI can be made to convince us and interact with us when AI has this kind of values and personality and brain, if you like? There is this book by Bruno Maçães, a Portuguese politician, who is like Technology and the New Geopolitics, where his punchline a little bit is like, whoever controls AI controls your ideology and therefore your future. Okay, that's big. And that has to do with the internal analysis part. And then it's what Tommy said, which is we need to have also a theory. The theory is part 3. Analysis is the science, the measurement. And number 1 is also measurement, but in terms of behavior. It's like this is behavioral sciences. This is behavioral psychology, let's say. This is the number 2 is like neuroscience, and number 3 is like the theory of physics. Right? Now, artificial neuroscience or mechanistic interpretability, as Anthropic calls it, and many people call it, is about going inside and understanding. And again, here are the main things here. It relates to safety. That's why Anthropic is very big on safety also. Well, that's not why, but that's also part of the reason, right? It relates to, can we edit the equations to change the behaviors? Okay? That's the question here in a nutshell.
But
Now,
let's go back 1 second, because the uninterpretable mind of AI means in practice that we don't know exactly how it works in LLM in detail. This is
much like we don't know how your brain and my brain.
To people that, for people that don't understand AI.
We do not know how it works. And unlike neuroscience, which is our brains or the primate brains, the animal brains, here we can do as many surgeries as we like. With monkeys or with rats, we cannot do it as easily. Here we have, that's a point Max Tegmark, a physicist at MIT who was organizing this workshop. Max Tegmark, in his opening of the workshop, made this point. It's like, in artificial neuroscience, unlike the natural neuroscience, we have infinite experiments and ways to make surgeries to the brain to understand what it does, which is beautiful if you think about it. Therefore, it will advance much more than the human neuroscience. Now, whether we can learn about human neuroscience by doing artificial neuroscience, it's a good question. I don't think it relates, because back to what Tommy said, it's not that our brain has the same architecture as this brain, right? The transformer. So who knows? But maybe there are some common principles of intelligence, as Tommy said, and as he writes the book about, that we can learn and discover. Maybe we can discover the laws of intelligence that apply to both artificial and biological intelligence through our study of the artificial brains, let's say, or artificial equations. I don't like the word brain, but the neural network. Is that okay, Fabio? Makes sense?
Yes.
I also link back a bit to what Tommy said. Are there laws of the science of intelligence, right? That's the whole point of the science of intelligence, like the science of physics. What are the laws of physics? What are the laws of intelligence? Whatever this means. Biological or... And by the way, if you discover the laws of intelligence, you can predict the future, obviously, because those laws don't change. All right, now, a couple of things here. This is an article we wrote with Tommy And basically, it has point. I'm going to go to business and future, and then we can discuss. Basically, and interestingly, yesterday, NVIDIA and Mercedes announced something new in Las Vegas, wherever they are, right? Let me give you a personal story. As you see here, the year 1995, the year that Vapnik wrote his book, one of his books, and I was starting my PhD. And back then, my PhD was funded by Mercedes-Benz. And I remember I was wondering how come like a car company is funding a PhD in machine learning and computer vision. I was also did part of my PhD in computer vision. Why is a car funding computer vision 30 years ago? Obviously, now we know why, right? Tommy was in a fully autonomous car, Mercedes car, in Stuttgart in 1997. Fully autonomous. He was inside a fully autonomous Mercedes car in Stuttgart in 1997. And then I asked Tommy a few years ago, actually, 20 years later, what happened to Mercedes, given they were ahead in computer vision and autonomous car research? And the answer was they stopped that research. They stopped funding MIT and probably others also, CMU and the likes. Why? Who knows? Lots of hypotheses here, legal, leadership. But here is, let me dramatize this. Business leaders and investors who don't understand the fundamental laws of technology and the fundamental trends of technology are dangerous. For example, it's possible that the business leader does not understand that computer vision can indeed become useful for cars and that indeed we can have autonomous cars. And because they don't get that, they kill research on autonomous cars. And by killing that research 25 years ago, they kill a whole auto industry of Germany. So one CEO, it's not one CEO obviously, but a leader, a business leader who does not understand technology is dangerous. They can kill a whole country and a whole industry with just one decision 25 years ahead. And that's to me is fundamental. Therefore, I'm going to the last one. The middle story has to do with an Einstein story. Go and read the article if you like. Some scientific developments are inevitable. And the insiders know what's inevitable better than anybody else. Of course, not the lawyers, of course, not the bankers, of course, not the business people, and of course, not the consultants.
This is not just Theos. This is Kuhn. This is people that.
This is the first podcast of our series. This is Tom Hart, the UK Homeland Security ex-head. This is fundamental. And that's why I always say that the question about what's the economic impact of AI is not a question economists are equipped to answer. And we say this actually with Tommy in our discussion in MIT MTech. Because the only question economists can answer today is what's the economic impact of today's AI.
So simplifying, draw a line of existing technology to do a regression instead of seeing the potential that is hidden. So for instance, they don't see the part that is the impact on science and the impact on creativity that will be coming.
And again, I'm sure, I suspect, I don't remember, right? If we go back to the predictions of economists and of investors in 2019 or 20, before Gen AI, right? Before there was any Gen AI. Of course, the insiders knew there is Gen AI possible. They didn't call it Gen AI, but they knew it's possible, right? If you ask them what's the impact of AI without Gen AI in the equation, look, McKinsey came up with this famous report in 2023 on the economic value creation from AI, 20 trillion average annually. Out of the 20 trillion, 13 are from predictive AI back then, 7 are from generative AI, which means just by removing generative AI 2 years before that, the number 20 was 13. Now, basically, forget about it. And who knows what's next? Number 20 may become number 40. It's as if you ask outsiders from the scientific progress to tell you, based on this graph of the average GDP per capita in the world the past 2,000 years, the beginning of the scientific revolution, tell us what's the economic impact of the scientific revolution in physics or whatever, right? Or the steam engine. What will they do? They will do what they always do. Look in the back mirror, analyze the data and say, extrapolate. Okay, if they are very optimistic, they'll do a line that goes like this. Nobody would see this line. Totally off. And given the speed with which things change, 2023, 20 trillion projection, 2022, before ChatGPT, 13 trillion projection. In 1 year, 7 more trillion. This is a joke, right? Therefore, I'm not saying that, of course, I'm much like nobody can be only insider. Basically, it's Thomas Kuhn. Ask the insiders, identify who are the insiders. Now, having said this, obviously business and investments are critical because without that, nothing is implemented. But the projections they make, and you have in your slide some projections about the financial impact. This is from Goldman and the likes, Goldman, Citi, JP Morgan in your slides. They talk about all those things with now 200 trillion, which is a crazy number, of course, from 13 to 20 to 200. I don't know how these numbers come up. But if you see here, it's all about productivity gains and based on today's AI, the LLMs basically, more or less, and some predictive AI. If you go to McKinsey or BCG in this case, they say total business model transformation, labor market reaches new equilibrium. Frankly, I have no idea what these words mean. What does it mean, reaches new equilibrium? I have no idea what it means. If you go to this one from McKinsey, I don't know. Half of today's work activities could be automated. How about tomorrow's work activities? What else can we do? I don't know what this means. Again, they are doing a great job in the short term, but I'm not sure anybody in the world other than insiders can have any sense, but even for the insiders, they cannot. Of course, it's hard in the midterm. Now, that's for the future. Now, let me go back and close here what we had. This is from a discussion I had with Tommy, where he suggested things like, well, some key points. I go quickly through this. We made a bunch of them already. History of AI, the revolution came from outsiders. Thomas Kuhn, he actually referred to Thomas Kuhn, who was a colleague of his in MIT at the time, before he went to Harvard. And the revolution from programming to learning, from Deep Blue to AlphaGo, basically from symbolic to machine learning. From the outsiders, the machine learning people, with Vladimir Vapnik, the Soviets coming to the US, the Soviet mathematicians, right, coming to the US, for example, but also others in the US, of course. The surprise of the LLMs, which is about this bitter lesson from Richard Sutton, who is another big guy in reinforcement learning, which is like lots of data and lots of compute will just give you this performance, which is amazing. We are now in the engineering era, but how does it relate to science? That's next. We are between the engineering era of the electricity era. Volta came up with the electric pill and the battery, but had no idea why it works. Maxwell came up with a theory, the laws, Maxwell's laws that we all learned. That was like, what, 50 years ago or something? 60, I don't remember now. And next, we talked a bit about curiosity, which is a bit the ingredient of scientists, of course. I'll skip this, although this is a fundamental Bible. It's called the Marr and Poggio 1977 Model of Intelligence. And Tommy wrote another version of it in 2012. I highly encourage you to read this article. It's a Bible of learning. And the reason I suggest you read this article, Levels of Understanding, from 1977, and 2012, is because this article links to geopolitics. And I'm going to close briefly here with a final slide on predictions. Monroe is Monroe with Donald Trump, which is a key word in the news now with the Monroe kind of doctrine he mentioned after the Venezuela event a couple of days ago in his press release. Is roughly, so what I did is I took this article by Axios, which is 2 days ago, the Monroe Doctrine, the War for Minerals, Oil, and AI, took the Levels of Understanding article of Tommy, put them in ChatGPT or Gemini, I don't remember, Gemini, I think, and I asked Gemini, or Notebook LM maybe, and I asked it, can you please combine those two and tell me what is the fundamental scientific, if I may call it this way, framework, or at least framework of Tommy Poggio and Marr from 1977, how does that relate to the Monroe Doctrine article? Why I ask this question? Because AI is about the AI stack. And the AI stack has the minerals, has the energy, has the chips, has the databases and the data, and the networks, and has the algorithms and has the applications. Right? And eventually has, that's a business, right? That's a stack. The levels of intelligence is the stack of intelligence from the scientific point of view, which has the chemistry, the physics, energy, and rare earth. It has the architecture, the algorithm, transformers or whatever. Yeah? It has a machine learning algorithm on top. And then Tommy added a few more layers around evolution. And as he said, one of the big questions is, how did evolution develop our learning algorithm? Basically, the way we learn, neural plasticity related stuff. This is a big mystery, right? It's another level. How did evolution learn? How did evolution develop us and primate brains able to learn using a specific learning algorithm, call it algorithm of not chemistry, which relates to neural plasticity and learning? This is a very difficult, it's a second order question if you think about this. Anyway, I put this to in AI and it gave me this. And the lesson here is that even geopolitics relates to science and scientific thinking. And let me put it otherwise. The lesson here is that everybody is, of course, useful, and we know this. We're at INSEAD. INSEAD is about diversity, and diversity here means to make sense of where the world is, where it comes from, and where it goes. You have to combine ideas from science, ideas from engineering, ideas from math, ideas from politics, ideas from philosophy, ideas from social sciences, ideas from geopolitics, ideas from business, ideas from finance. That's the best way. And this is a prime example, in my view, of combining 1977 paper on the levels of intelligence with a 2 days ago paper on the Donroy doctrine. And what AI came up with is, as you see, I'll start from the last one, true AI leadership will require mastering multiple levels, the raw materials, cognition, reflecting Poggio's revised levels. This means you have to supply, it's an ecosystem, point number one, where you have to manage supply chains, and geopolitics about who manages the supply, who owns the end-to-end supply value chain of AI, the stack. In Europe, there is something called Eurostack. I encourage you to check. And of course, who owns the resources that shape all that stuff, research, education, talent, financing, etc., etc. And to me, this is one of the most beautiful examples of combining seemingly unrelated topics. Now, then, finally, last thing, all these slides, up to this slide, were fed into an AI with this prompt. I will give you, it was fed in Gemini, I will give you a presentation, and I would like that you make, this is a prompt, right? I would like that you make, based on these slides, and only these slides, right, and some links, but I'm not sure the AI went through the links, some predictions about where AI will move towards the next 1, 5, 10 years, just based on this file. And this is a beautiful exercise, because then what we did later on with McKinsey, BCG, and Goldman was we did exactly the same exercise Fabio did, where he plugged in AI as context the best of McKinsey, the best of BCG, and the best of the financial analysts, and asked AI to do exactly the same. The predictions they came up with from BCG, McKinsey, and the analysts were about labor, automation, 200 trillion, 20 trillion, whatever it is. Here are the predictions that AI came up from the slides that I shared with you so far. 1 year outlook, foundation and governance, transition to scientific copilots. You may have heard Sam Altman already. Demis Hassabis and DeepMind have been talking about this for more than a year now. But even Sam Altman, who is a marketing guy, started talking about we're having internal targets at OpenAI to have AI co-scientists and AI that will do small discoveries in a year and big discoveries in 2 years. So one of the key words of 2026, key themes in 2026, I believe, is AI scientists, AI and science, but also AI and physical and science and robotics. So that's what comes out of here. The scientific, and remember, this comes out of papers which are some of them 50 years old, right? Emergence of artificial neuroscience and related to legal enforcement and governance and controlling the behavior. Maybe not this year, given also the politics. 5-year outlook, scientific stage number 2, what basically Sam Altman said 2 months ago, but this is based on much older papers. More creativity from AI and the physical AI revolution. 10 years outlook, scientific stage number 3, developing, testing, and refining its own original scientific theories, autonomous curiosity, and whatever this means for the progress of science. And then as science is about discovery, industry is about productization, and so is business, and society adapts. Strategic consideration for leaders based on these articles, master the ecosystem, the levels of understanding of intelligence, the inevitability lesson, avoid the Daimler-Benz mistake, failing to commit to inevitable technological shifts because you don't understand, and the power of talent and the sociology of science, effectively, among other things. I'll stop here and only go to these questions we had for you to reflect. How far are we from the next paradigm phase? A bit what Tommy said. What could the predictions have been before ChatGPT, what I mentioned? 7 trillion gone just because of that. I'm sure it will be even more. Is the question about the midterm impact of AI and technology on the economy and society something economists can answer? For you to reflect, I have my views on this. What articles do you recommend to use for the next 1, 5, 10 year predictions? And what are your predictions? And one exercise I highly recommend you to do is the exercise we did with Fabio, called select your favorite articles, put them in AI and say, based on this, what do you predict? It was beautiful to see, and it was a lot of fun. I'll stop sharing and go to any kind of discussion and question you have. And again, as I said at the beginning, I'm a little bit more forceful than usual.
Questions, we let Ludo ask questions as a special,
Ludo,
as he's a special guest, if he wants,
just for those of you who don't know Ludo,
or others,
For those
of
who don't know
course,
Ludo, Ludo
or
was-
Tomaso that is still here, please fill in all the questions in the chat. I have many questions myself if needed.
So, introduction for those who don't know Ludo again. Ludo has been at INSEAD since what year, Ludo? I don't remember.
88.
88, was at Yale before, at Harvard before, became the Dean of INSEAD in the 90s. He started the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center. He started the INSEAD Family Business Center. We work with Ludo a lot on corporate governance, AI governance, and he's my favorite colleague at INSEAD by far.
Thank you. That's good. Now, my one question we had was, or one of my motivational questions is whether artificial intelligence can make the world fairer. That is, that by the true changes of behavior and to structuring fairness principles in the artificial intelligence, that people could be trained to become fairer. That's my micro question in a narrow sense. It feels that is of interest to me.
Yeah. So first of all, we wrote together an article on how AI can support governance. This is an article that was published in November. For those of you interested, if you look for Ludo's name and my name, you can find the article, AI and corporate governance or something. I don't remember. So that's part of the answer. Second is, part of the question is, can we make AI more fair in the way it thinks or behaves? And that has to do a little bit with artificial neuroscience from the engineering point of view, editing the equation to make it behave in a controlled way. And of course, a lot with how we use it as humans and also the regulations around it and governance around it. So it's a lot more on us than on it. Third question, which is a different version of your question. So scientifically, yes, we can improve. Practically, it's up to us, obviously. Third question is, it's the question of Kissinger, Schmidt, and Huttelnocher, Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt from Google, and Dan Huttelnocher from MIT, who wrote this book in the age of AI about 6 years ago, where basically they asked the question, what does it mean to be a human in the age of AI? If AI can influence the way we read news, form opinions, consume, what does it do to us? Whoever controls AI controls your ideology, much like recommender systems controlled what news we read and what products we buy. Now AI, as Patty Mice from MIT, podcast episode number 3, I think, she says AI is the most persuasive technology humanity ever developed. So, to your question, it depends on how AI will influence the way we think, much like media, social media, books, and the church, and the priests influenced us over the centuries. And I don't have the answer to this, obviously, but these are all some elements that are giving some, in my head at least.
I don't see many questions, so I go with mine. I don't know if you can see it now. Let's say in semiconductors, we have something very simple. Very simple, that is this Moore's law, that they say the number of transistors on microchip doubles every 2 years. And we see on LLMs that there are something similar for price, not for capability. Do you see any strong pattern or any strong technological trajectory emerging on LLMs or not?
Yeah, good. So, first of all, there are two things. One is given the current architecture and the current paradigm. The other is given a potentially new architectural paradigm, which nobody knows, as Tommy said, but it will be surprising if we don't see something like that coming in the next 10 years, as he said. And obviously, this is a multi-trillion-dollar question, so everybody works on that. Ilya Sutskever, and I'm sure a bunch of people in China and a bunch of people everywhere else. That's one thing. So in terms of the current paradigm, yes, we become better at being more efficient in how we use data, what kind of data we use, how fast the algorithm is, how fast the algorithm converges, and therefore how far we can push the limits of what's called scaling law, which is the equivalent of Moore's law for transformer architectures only. I don't say LLMs, I say transformer architectures, because LLMs is just an application of transformer architectures, right? So yes, the scaling law has been in a short scale of over 5 years, whatever it is, or maybe 10 years, I guess 10 years, has been the equivalent of Moore's law within the transformers paradigm. Once we have a different paradigm, like probably once we go, let's say, from chips to quantum computer equivalent in Moore's law, who knows? So from chips to quantum computing, It's like from transformers to the next architecture, potentially. Who knows? Nobody knows. It can be a step function. That's part of the answer. Now, in terms of the costs, again, because we are more efficient, we use the data better, compute cost, competition, all that stuff, of course, prices go down. But for all we know, we may need to pay a bit more to go to the next paradigm if that gives us business reasons to do so, because we can have AI which is 10 times better than any AI we've seen today, for example, in specific applications.
Yes, Marcello Vena, I hope I pronounced it correctly, has a similar question is, while scaling laws are hitting limits at last for English language and LLMs plateauing, GPT architecture, will the next incremental AI wave be about unlearning, artificial neuroscience driven by AI agent?
So,
more in general, the question for me, if I can add to this, is do we need to understand the better learning mechanism, as LLM seems to just ingest a lot of data to go to the next level?
this is, as you see, again, I shouldn't be sharing this necessarily. And that Tommy told me, I know you are there, you sent me overnight. It's funny, it has with Gemini and ChatGPT, 26 lectures on the foundations of deep learning, intelligence and its fundamental principles. Of course, yes, is the answer to your question. And today we understand close to nothing, as far as I know. And I don't know again if Tom is there. And the whole idea is these principles offer a first step towards a unified theory of modern AI that explains not only how current systems work and why, and it gives us the science of intelligence, which is what are the laws that make biological and artificial systems behave intelligently. Now, what does it mean behave intelligently? Let's say behave intelligently means behave in ways that we consider to be intelligent because that's how we perceive it. One can say intelligence is like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. I don't want to get into the question what's intelligence, and there are many types of intelligence, as we know. Point is, if I build, and by the way, I'm going to go here and share something with the audience, Platonic, just to give you a sense, presentations, hypothesis. It's a student of Tommy, actually, who wrote this, Brian, and Philip Isola is a professor at MIT. Check it out. Basically, those guys are trying to find out things like, are there representations of the world which capture how the world is structured, which are Platonic? I don't know how to explain. Just check this out. This is fascinating. It's a hypothesis. And what they do here is basically they develop models only from text, models only from images, and then they see the inside the equation, the artificial neuroscience analysis, mechanistic interpretability, and identify that somehow the representations that AI learned about language and the representations AI learned about images share something similar, mathematically speaking, which is the Platonic representation of reality, if I may call it that way. And this is as an example of what could be things related to the science of intelligence and what Tommy's book is. And Tommy's not about this. Tommy's about even more fundamental than this, but this is an example, right?
Yes. And the last question from Quinton is on a better future, is which human biases, flaws might AI help us to overcome?
Which human biases? Oh my God. I think none. I'm sorry, but human nature changes much slower than AI does. Unless we have some chips in our brains, I don't know. In fact, I'm more worried than, if you ask this question, I'll share my opinion on this. And I'm going to share also, let me share again my screen, which I highly recommend. I'll highly recommend one more thing, which is Google versus, sorry, I don't see it here. Okay. This is one of the startups I co-founded, Tremos, and we are focusing on online trust and safety. I don't know why it doesn't work here. Google versus Gonzalez, or Gonzalez versus Tamet. I actually wrote this article more or less 2 years ago. This is a US Supreme Court case. Briefly, Tremo is about online trust and safety. It's about how we make sure, for example, the AI algorithms online don't polarize people. That's not what we do exactly, but how to keep the internet safe. And this is a famous Supreme Court case I highly recommend you to read, which is about Gonzalez, who are the parents of a child that was killed in Paris terrorist attacks a few years back, sued Google, they own YouTube, with the argument being that the recommender algorithms and the algorithms of Google polarized these young souls that became terrorists and went to Paris and killed their child. So the AI polarized people turned them into terrorists. Terrorists went to Paris and killed the child of Gonzalez. And Gonzalez sued Google for that. It's a fascinating case. And if you take this together with the statement that AI today is even more powerful than Amazon's recommender algorithms or YouTube's recommender algorithms we had until now, the 2010 kind of period of AI I mentioned, imagine what AI can do to us in the way we think. Back to Matthias, whoever controls AI controls your ideology, what you buy, what you read, what you think, what you believe, and therefore your future, and therefore our future. So I'll say I'm personally cautiously optimistic. And I put the word optimistic because I'm an optimist by nature when it comes to science and technology. But I'm cautious about what humans will do with this, or what will AI do to us in terms of polarization and other behaviors. And I don't know the answer to that. That's where governance comes in picture, and that's why we work with Ludo. Because unless we direct science in the right direction, it may take us in the wrong direction. And that's governance.
Thomas or Robert, do you have any last minute question?
Yeah. Ludo, you're right. Social media does a lot, and that's because of algorithms. Recommender algorithms is a version. By the way, let me share one more thing. Recommendation algorithms, the recommendation you see online, is basically an algorithm that selects which, even Google search, right? If you think about this, Google search selects which of the trillion or whatever number of documents out there, I don't know what the number is, maybe 10 trillion, which of the 10 trillion documents that humans have written to show to you. LLMs select which of the infinite number of possible texts that can be written to show to you. It's a continuous version of the discrete recommender algorithms. You can think about this way if you like. Continuous in a sense, right? Of course, it's not continuous because we cannot write every single text because some things are nonsense. But basically, LLMs are like the recommender systems of Amazon and Netflix that select not only among the available written books and articles that humans wrote, but about everything that is not gibberish. And therefore a lot more powerful. So yes, Ludo, we are observing a more powerful version of social media recommendations because it's again a recommendation. LLM is a recommendation. You can think exactly the same way.
We are at time, and thank you so much to everyone for attending to this long session, long and very deep session. We appreciate all your time, and of course, the documents will be available for people that belong to the chat have already been distributed. For the participant, we will share video and the documents after the session.
A quick one, Fabio. I want to have a final disclaimer.
Sure.
I was intentional, provocative about economists, about outsiders, about insiders, and about Mercedes or not, I don't know the specifics. And I tried to shake a little bit the tree intentionally, or maybe not so much, I don't know. So therefore, everything I said, and as I said at the beginning, there is not one history, there is not one lesson, there are some forces, and there are many histories. So I want to repeat that.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.